Hello, and welcome to Mayor Brown's podcast series, Credibly Challenged. This podcast focuses on risk management issues for financial institutions of all sizes, particularly those in the banking sector. My name is Matt Bisanz, and I'm a partner in Mayor Brown's financial services regulatory and enforcement practice. Joining me today is Matt Wolf. Matt is a director at RSM, and he focuses on digital assets, blockchain, and other types of innovative technologies. On today's program, we'll talk a little bit about those innovative technologies, but also around the way he's built his practice and how he uses that practice to help clients manage risk, not only from those technologies, but in the general course of their financial institution's business. Matt, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me. You have a great podcast voice, by the way.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. So tell me a little bit about the practice at RSM. What's it structured? What do you advise on?
Absolutely. So our blockchain and digital asset practice at RSM operates a little bit like a traditional center of excellence model. So RSM, big firm, fifth largest public accounting firm. We have 140, 150 some odd different service lines. So we've been for, really since 2014, that's when the practice started. And I can give a little color as to how that started because it's an interesting, it's not a long story, but it's an interesting reason. Um, but we support the whole firm. So we've been training people across the traditional service areas, audit, accounting, tax, risk, to be blockchain capable, right? Digital asset capable to understand things at a high level and be functional with their clients. And then we backstop them with subject matter expertise when it's appropriate or when things get uber technical, right? Or
Yeah.
or uber risky, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
My specific function within that team is I work with financial institutions that are expanding into digital asset products and services,
Mhm.
or fintechs that are dealing with digital assets that are sort of entering the regulated space. Either they're being required to get money transmitter licenses, or they're becoming trust companies, or they're becoming, buying banks, expanding banks, de novo chartering banks, things like that.
So when you're dealing with these kinds of cutting edge technologies and matters and regulatory issues, there's a bit of nuance and also a bit of technical jargon almost to the practice of consulting. What are some ways that you've developed to work with clients when you're communicating these issues? Maybe like a fintech has brought in a compliance officer from a bank, or a bank's risk officer is trying to get their head around how this kind of technology is different than their traditional loan portfolio. So, like, how do you work to facilitate the conversation?
Good question. So because we work with both banks and fintech companies, you get really two completely different starting points, if you will, as well as two completely separate gaps in talent and understanding as you're supporting those clients. So it's sort of the opposite for each one. So if we're talking about a bank, they're usually missing the technical know-how of how these systems operate and where the risks lie, right? And you're trying to get the bank within its bank framework to expand whatever their unique risk management framework is to operate, and operational frameworks are to do that. With the fintech, it's the opposite. They have a deep understanding of what they're doing. They don't understand what it's like to operate as a regulated entity, right? And
Mhm.
so you're oftentimes starting from zero with, instead of the technology, for instance, you're starting from zero with um, developing proper risk management framework that would be expected of a regulated entity, right? Policies and
Mhm.
procedures and people that they wouldn't necessarily think that they needed in reporting and independent review and all these other things.
So when you've been having those kind of conversations, is there like an example where your assessment of the risk really differed from that of the person you were dealing with, that your client? Like maybe you're talking to a fintech,
Every time.
and you're talking about the right KYC to do for AML compliance, and you're like, look, this is a high risk thing. You're going to be expected to collect these data fields from it. There's a high level of risk, and they're like, well, there's a low level of risk that like we just disagree. We don't think that that's really an important thing that we need to be building out right now. And like in that kind of situation, how do you resolve the different assessments?
I think it's less about like this is important versus like I think there are less disagreements that we get into, or difference of opinion, I should say, on hey, that risk should be weighted high risk versus medium risk, or it's a 10 versus a 7 or something like that. It really is more about there is a common theme with both fintechs and banks that they want to move quickly. They have an idea, they're passionate about it, they want to get it to market, they want it to make it work. There's just a difference in the risk tolerance, right? And so it's usually a conversation of, like I said before, on the fintech side, hey, even though you don't realize you need someone to do that, or a policy or a procedure or
Hmm.
some sort of this documentation seems superfluous and you're annoyed that you have to do it because that's not usually the venture capital mindset of move quickly and break things, right?
Hmm.
Ask for forgiveness, not for permission. But in the
Right,
regulated space, that's not the thought process, right? And so there's
right.
a lot of time that inflection point that happens where you talk to a founder who's got a bunch of VC money behind him who goes, I'm going now, right?
Hmm.
Like we're going to figure this out or you're not going to stop me from this, right? And then on the bank side, it becomes more of a, well, I don't understand why I need that. Like, why is that different than this from a technical operational perspective? They're going to make us hire all these extra people or
Hmm.
these extra analysts, or we have to do this extra level of reporting, or, that's, I think, more on the bank side where the education and the opinions happen, right?
Hmm. And putting aside maybe that cultural and talent risk that you're describing, in the blockchain distributed ledger type space, what are the risks that you feel are different from those of traditional financial services and financial products, or even at traditional financial institutions?
Another really good question. And I think that one really has mostly to do with I don't see there's certainly new risks, right? But when the nice thing about financial services regulatory oversight and frameworks is that there's been a lot of it for a long time, especially in the risk management space. And so really you can back into most risk categories, right? Most
Mhm.
risks are it's not like there's not a new risks, right? We're still dealing with like counterparty risk or
Mhm.
operational risk or reputational risk or liquidity risk or legal risk.
Mhm.
And so that that stuff all is the same in my mind is similar categorization. There's not a lot of debate there. It's
Mhm.
just a you know, hey, we need to look within those and think about all of these risks that are new from an operational standpoint, what we have to do to protect against them, which usually there's a handful of new ones, right? But
Mhm.
there's a lot of traditional ones, right? We're talking about access control. A lot of times banks will ask, hey, we must need a lot of new policies and procedures for digital asset custody, right? There's got to be a
Mhm.
custody policy somewhere, right?
Mhm.
A lot of times that's just handled within your traditional access control policy, right? And there's an
Right.
upgrade made in there to reference that, hey, here are our vendor, the steps that we do with our vendor, and we test them and so forth and so
Mhm.
on. So um, it's a fluid answer to that one right now that,
Right.
what is the expansion of risk? But I think
Mhm.
the other part to that is there must be an understanding going in
Mhm.
that a regulator is looking at this right now as though any of these activities, even if you don't perceive it to be, is a heightened risk,
Mhm.
period, and will require your most heightened treatment of that risk and remediation of that risk and testing of that risk, both internally and out to the third party for the most part. I mean, which is really a newer thing. I think
Right.
that we're seeing is before you were trusted to have your own sort of risk management, and that was tested, right? Or your own like vendor management and due diligence policy. But I think now the ask is to heighten that, right?
Right. That's tough. That is tough. And I think one challenge that we face, at least coming at it from lawyers, is there aren't many laws that prescribe these things. That we do get the question of how do we build out the policy, And sometimes we can say something like, well, it's already subsumed in your information security policy, or you already have custody practices around dematerialized securities, and those in many ways are similar to a digital asset from a custody perspective. So we can analogize, but a lot of it is based on industry practices. And I think that's really where banks hire and fintechs hire people like you, is because you get to see this broad-based set of industry practices. Uh, but the flip side is they expect you to know them all and expect you to know how they're changing, and you can't just point to the lawyer and say, give me the law book on what to do.
It's
So
the old template question, right? Like you got templates for this, right?
right,
And we
right.
just, yeah.
And so when you're designing like specific risk management practices, getting maybe a little lower than the policy level, how do you know when there's a change? How, like something like, I'll just throw it out at you, like there's the recent bankruptcy decision saying, oh, the contracts were insufficient. It really became the crypto really became the asset of the bankruptcy estate. It's not held in custody, and you can see that if you look here in the contract at X, Y, and Z. And so like when you hear something like that, are you adjusting your practices for the customer agreement? Are you adjusting, like how is your mind working on that kind of problem?
I mean, like I mentioned, like it's the most, you assume the most risk here, right? So
Mhm,
if you're executing a vendor agreement, if you read it once, normally you read it 10 times here, right?
mhm,
But I think more specifically, the notion here, and I'm obviously not a lawyer, so I don't deal with as many contracts, like the review, like once a contract has been executed,
mhm,
I don't know what the deal is with like going back and changing that contract, right?
mhm,
But what I can speak to is if we were to move that over into the policy procedural space, or the relationship that you have with a vendor and what you're expected to maintain, because I think the regulator is saying to the bank or the financial institution, hey, you're the responsibility party, right? Your
mhm.
job is to make sure that this whole thing is safe for the customer. When you've partnered with a fintech in this way, the fintech is like the innovation entity, right? Like they have the VC money, they can put money into the development. Like banks have trouble doing that, right? Like you can't just shove a bunch of capital into a bank and go build product, right? Like
Right,
there's some real
right.
challenges there. So that we look to those fintech entities to sink in that money and build something that's prime time. And so in that way, needing to go test. So when we look at the policy and procedure side, if we're talking about how do we adjust for the risk as it's evolving over time kind of thing,
Hmm.
that's why the regulator is now saying we expect you to go test into the entity, right? Like to be agile with that, that we want more people on the risk side. We want more activity on the risk side. The first question you're going to get asked is, how do you manage risk at the institution or the organization, right? And there, yeah, you have to have a construct for this. Okay, well, we have these policies and procedures. We review them on a frequency, right? If they're not
Hmm.
working, we will adjust them. So that the theory is that if you had something like you're talking about, if you didn't catch it the first time, you'd catch it 3 months later, you'd catch it in a period before it's an issue, and then you'd make the adjustment.
Hmm. Makes sense.
But
Makes
that
sense.
demands a test and that to be written as we
Hmm.
test in this way is kind of
Right.
that new attention to detail that's going to be asked there for like a community bank or something like that.
Yeah, and you're really getting in, it sounds like, and working with a lot of stakeholders in the bank, and maybe not always with outside counsel. I know like we've worked together in the past on matters, and you probably work a lot more with the in-house counsel where they are brought in to advise on how a policy, say, aligns with a contracting process, or to make the kind of decisions around the legal risk side, or if there is a legal risk. Um, what's it like for a consultant, a non-lawyer, to be working with counsel, and like maybe like what's one thing you wish we could do better to help you be more effective?
I think that's really more of a like how does a consultant learn to how fences make good neighbors,
Mhm,
right? And so I think knowing as a consultant where the fences are between
mhm,
counsel and a consultant, like an operational or strategic consultant like me, is
mhm,
really important to having successful relationships with counsel,
mhm,
whether it's in-house counsel or it's external legal, a third party, outside counsel. Um,
right.
I would say that in almost every case, there's outside counsel on what I
Hmm.
do, just because of the nature of what it is, that
Hmm.
there's usually some level of like specialty legal opinion that's at play. So it's a team effort.
Right.
And in my mind, those fences, I mean, I don't make policy opinion. I mean, I'm sorry, I don't make agreement opinion. So your customer
Yeah.
agreement, your intercompany agreements, anything that is drafted by an attorney, we
Hmm.
sit in a support role and we make that very clear at the beginning, right? We're here to make the attorneys and the leadership of our clients
Hmm.
successful, and whatever we need to do to either stay out of the way or support, that's what we do. It's funny because when we do the applications for a bank,
Hmm.
there's like the advertising section at the front, right?
Yep. Yeah.
Where council puts their letterhead so that when it gets right, like because the
Yeah.
public volume and things like that, and I get asked all the time, hey, do you want to put like a thing here? And I mean, it's just my personal nature. Like,
Yeah.
no, like
Right. Right.
we're happy to be here, right? Building
Right.
relationships with you, like that's all. It's like
Well,
we don't exist without the referrals from the lawyers.
right.
Period.
Yeah. I think we have a similar view that we also appreciate the referrals because we're not going to get down into the weeds. We don't have that technical knowledge of how to lay out a security infrastructure that we can say, well, yeah, this policy looks good. It ticks off to the checklist in the regulation or the handbook, but we're not going to be there coding it or testing it. Certainly not testing it like you guys are. But I think that does bring up and you've touched on it a few times of the service provider that RSM has been around for decades, probably even longer than that. And law firms like Mayer Brown are also long standing. I
Right.
think we've been around for going on over 170
Much
years
longer
at
than
this
you or
point.
me,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. But in digital assets, there's a constant changing cast of characters, and maybe not so much on the bank side, but certainly on the fintech side and the people who are looking to help the banks and fintechs, the service providers, the hardware vendors, the software vendors, the people who are looking to provide back office or middle office services are constantly churning. I'll use the term there. And how do you help your clients manage that third party risk that like you can say, well, look, RSM's been around 50, 70 years. We haven't gotten sued out of existence. Your outside counsel, Mayer Brown, or one of the other big law firms, they're probably not going to do something that's going to get you sued out of existence. But like this new person who started 6 months ago and has three clients, I feel like they might present a little different risk profile.
I mean, it really I wish it was anything more um calculated than self-preservation, I
Hmm.
guess. So in our space, and we're seeing this right now with the public accounting firms, right? That with the proof of reserves and the audits, and you're seeing really, you step out and you provide a service like that to the wrong client, and even though you're doing it with the best intent,
Hmm.
I mean, you could wake up without a job the next morning, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so we have the luxury, I suppose, of being large enough at this point, and
Hmm.
a large enough client base and a large enough funnel of inbound business that's looking for our help across tax, audit, consulting, accounting,
Hmm.
that we can be choosy, right?
Hmm.
We're a public accounting firm. We have this crazy intake just like you do, right?
Right.
Like, just you're a big firm. This area of digital assets is new.
Hmm.
um, they're not going to take a firm-wide risk
Right.
on us stepping out and doing something even more inherently risky than us existing.
Right. Right. It makes a lot of sense. And I think sometimes that can be difficult to communicate, not just within our own organizations, but also to get clients to realize this, that you may have a really energetic mid-level manager who is the leader of an institution's digital asset initiative. Maybe they're trying to figure out the right use cases for the organization, how to integrate it into their product offering. Um, but then their management isn't seeing those weeds. Their management has a metric, a dashboard. It's one of 10 initiatives they're managing.
Mhm.
It's not even responsible for much revenue at this point. It's probably a loss right now because they're trying to design it. And so on the little pie chart on the dashboard, it's a teeny sliver of the revenue. It's probably a teeny sliver of the expense. And so everything sounds great. This is de minimis. It's from my perspective as a senior executive, everything's being well managed. Um, but that can create some complacency because sometimes those teeny little slivers of revenue and expense and headcount and all those things can have an outsized risk to the organization. So how do you get people to guard against complacency when they do manage by dashboard?
Oh, you mean like complacency about managing for the risk and
Yes.
accepting a
Yep.
client that
Mhm.
thankfully I mean, it would be really hard if we were a boutique firm. And I
Mhm.
think that's why you'll see more boutique audit firms and consulting firms and accounting firms doing the audits and the taxes and the, accounting for some of the more risky crypto exchanges, things like that, right? Um, well, I'm really thankful that I have a full risk management division at the firm that
Mhm.
anytime I want to take on a client, I have to send in a whole, set of documentations that say why we should accept the client and what they're doing. And then I
Mhm.
have to speak to a whole review panel that we talk about. And then, that's just for consulting. If
Right.
you want to go to financial audit or you go
Mhm.
into tax kind of areas, there's another level of review and scrutiny that if you're, you know, the entity isn't
Mhm.
wound tight, right? Isn't buttoned up, I should say.
Yeah.
Um, it's gonna be hard to take them as a client.
And then to extend that to the clients when you're working with the clients, when you're educating them, when you're helping them design the control process, how do you get them to guard against complacency? How do you get them to say kind of be engaged and provide incredible challenge to these new activities that you're, I'm sure, a cheerleader to some extent of we need innovation, but also in responsible innovation, to use the OCC's
Yeah, I
parlance.
mean, so the really fun part about what I do is I don't have to cheerlead the innovation. I know that sounds weird to say, but in my career, I've always been trying, when you work in new technology, for the most part, you are trying to get people to do new things they've never done before.
Mhm.
Where I come in the process now, I am the brakes,
Mhm.
right? So, uh, as much as I can help the bank or the fintech achieve their dreams of becoming the thing they want to be or launching the product they want to launch,
Mhm.
I'll equally as likely to kill their dreams of like, hey, you can't do this, and here's why. Right?
Mhm.
If you do this, right? And then
Right.
and that's when I pull in, you, Matt, and you go, yep, he's not lying.
Right.
You do this and it's that time,
Right.
right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
so that's I think like I have in my firm a whole nother group. That's the
Yeah.
role I think we serve for our clients is to say,
Yeah.
hey, we're monitoring their guidance. We know it's coming. We're talking to the regulatory agencies all the time. Here's
Mhm.
what you need to know, and here's what you need to upgrade in your controls and testing ongoing so
Right.
that we're on top of that. And that responsibility, I should say, I think sits with us, and that's why
Right.
our clients and like yours, right, appreciate that
Yeah.
when you call them and you say, hey, did you see this happen today,
Mhm.
right?
Yes. Yeah. And yeah, we're the gatekeepers, and certainly the SEC has been quite vocal about the importance of our gatekeeper responsibilities.
Hmm.
Um, One challenge I think we both face, though, is that when we're coming in on these types of projects, we're dealing with senior people, but we're not dealing with the senior most people. That we may get an early meeting with them, and then they push it down to the day
Yes,
to
sir.
day, like the SVP who's going to run this initiative. And we might check in with them at once a month or every 3 months, or when there's a problem, and tell them like, well, here's how this new initiative you launched is coming along. Here's what we're doing to support you guys on it. But it's a limited scope to the senior most levels because they're running a huge financial institution or a fintech. They're dealing with getting their next series, and they're dealing with all the demands of their current investors and those kind of things. How do you prioritize that limited time with the senior most levels of your clients to make sure they understand the risk issues that you're advising on?
I think because of the nature of what we're doing with our clients, them being mostly either existing regulated financial institutions or new soon to be regulated financial institutions, they're on their best behavior when it comes to the acknowledgement of risk. It's almost like becomes their job, right? Their
Hmm.
primary job. You're president of the bank, is CEO of the bank. Like it's a lot of manage the board, manage general growth, manage the risk. And when a bank chooses, or a financial institution or a fintech chooses to move into this space and is handling digital asset or proposing digital asset products and services, it's a really it's treated, I think, in my experience, when I speak to my clients, I'm talking almost all the time to the chief risk officer or the chief operator or the chief executive. There's usually one of them sort of consistently involved.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then but once it gets brought down to the operational layer,
Hmm.
um, I think it's there's so much going on that those individuals always sort of show up on a regular cadence. So it's not like we really get that distance from them yet, because we're in the formation phase of this a lot. I'm sure as
Right.
we move in more cases to like the operational zone,
Hmm.
where we're just ongoing operations, yeah, I mean,
Hmm.
my presence even sort of starts to back out at a certain point, and we start moving down the chain even with our own consultants, right, to the
Right.
operational level.
Yeah, and you are at more of the strategic level, but at the operational level, I think one of the challenges that I've seen is there's kind of a tension, and it may trickle up a little bit into the, I see it at banks more at the strategic level of they want us to provide expert counsel on a specific issue, but they also want to be able to develop some in-house knowledge around it. And so
Mm,
there's a tailored, I call it the tailored solution versus the in-house knowledge, that I can do a great report on whether or not you have satisfied the NYDFS standards for security, custody, what AML, whatever types of things. And I'm sure you guys do similar reports. And it's tailored. It's on, our format. We use our terminology.
mhm.
But then a client will say, like, well, I don't want to pay you to do this every year. I want my second or third line of defense to do this. And so instead of you doing it, can you train us to do it, or develop a way
Can
for
you
us to
train the
do it?
trainer?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so how do you manage that tension of, it'd be nice if I had a 30-year stream of, well, I just am going to do these reports for the next 30 years and get paid for them. But also my clients want to be able to do a good portion of this on their own.
So I don't know if I have a good answer for that, other than I feel like sometimes I'm in the business of innovating the risk management process,
Mm-hmm.
right? So for whatever reason, I don't know if you feel this, but like the risk management zone is
Mm-hmm.
like this ever expanding zone. It will never contract, right?
Right.
Like it is the job of the regulator to find more questions and risks, and technologies and processes are getting more complicated, so there's more parts that can break,
Yep.
and we're moving to this place from like intermediation to like hyper intermediation, where we've got all these different parties circling around the transaction like known parties that can stop a part of it.
Mm-hmm.
To bring some blockchain in, to quote some Vitalik. Uh, the I just I don't know. I got all sidetracked because of Vitalik. What were we talking about?
Yeah,
What was the question again?
it
Can you bring
sounds,
back the
like you're
question?
saying there's going to be work for us because there's always going to be a new risk to manage, or a new way to manage risk. And so even though we're going to help our clients build their stuff for today, they're going to know how to do the AML review for this year, but then there's going to be something like the beneficial ownership regulation, and they're going to bring one of us in to expand their
Yeah,
AML
so
program.
where I was, thank you for that. Thank you. Where I was actually going with that was that I really, what I said originally was, I really feel like an innovator in the risk management process, right?
Hmm.
And so as this ever expanding universe, we have to get more efficient with how we manage risk. There has to be new processes and brand new systems. And
Hmm.
so sometimes I think that's what we're doing with our clients a lot, without even it being a thing we bill for or like have listed in the statement of work. It's okay. We've got brand new processes in this, and they don't always fit nicely into the way we used to manage risk as an entity.
Yeah.
And so, is it new software? Is it new processes? Are we regrouping risk? Do we have an entirely new review committee and process for how we do it? And I think that's different for everyone. And so, yeah, solving for that part, I think, becomes part and parcel to what we're doing.
Yeah, I'll see what you think about this, but maybe an example of that is around AML filters and AML screening processes that for decades there have been automated ways to do transaction monitoring. Like that's the predominant way to do it, is using different types of filters and different types of heuristics to prioritize AML issues. And for a while, that was agreed. Like I'd say that was almost a commoditized type of risk management. But now in recent years, I've seen people trying to merge it with model risk and saying, well, really, like these heuristics, they're just a model. And we need to have some kinds of controls around the model risk from the heuristics. It's great that we have this person who's designing them, but we actually need to integrate it into our model risk management framework. And so that's a way of something that was a routine standalone activity has a new risk element to it.
And let's just stay on that thread, right? For like
Yeah.
the BSA, AML, OFAC transaction monitoring zone. Um, I can't imagine what it's like for exchanges and banks and some of these look back requests, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the costs of them.
Mm-hmm.
They're only going to get more, right? And
Yeah.
if you don't have a way to proactively get in front of that and say, look, thank you for your look back request. Here is that information. We already have it. Because
Mm-hmm.
to go back and get it if you didn't have it in the first place is literally millions of dollars in
Right.
service
Yeah.
fees. Like you're
Yeah.
going to hire someone, it's going to be millions of dollars. You're not going to have a choice or you're going to get shut down,
Right.
right? And that's
Mm-hmm.
the stuff that has to be solved for in my mind. That can't be a thing.
No. No. I,
Especially when it's
I've
not
done the
even you.
millions of
Like there's
dollar
some bad
things.
actor out in the world that did something and they did
Yeah.
something through your exchange. It might have been totally legal what they did in your exchange, but next thing you know, you're paying $2 million to you and me
Yeah.
because you got to go look at all the transactions.
Right. Well, this was years ago. So I doubt any of your clients have it, but I had a client who printed off their transaction records and they kept it in binders. And it could have been kept on the computer, but they printed it off. And when we came in to help them with a review, we were like, well, you've just added a couple $100,000 to the review because we need to review these transactions. We could have put them in a system, like we could have
Right.
been had them on a screen. We could have sorted them, filtered them, but because you kept paper transaction records like that, now we're going to have to find some other way to review them. And I just could not believe that like that early on choice of, oh well, we'll just print it off and that way we don't have to come up with a document warehouse ended up being so terribly expensive for them.
This is you ask first.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Well, Matt, I really want to thank you for being on the program today. The credibly challenged listeners always appreciate these different viewpoints, and it was great hearing from you, and I look forward to working with you in the future on other types of these projects. I also want to thank our audience for tuning in. We wouldn't be here without you, and we really value your time. And so for this month, thanks everyone.
Thank you. Thanks, Matthew.